All right. Thanks for letting me play that. Certainly, I'm grateful that we can be here talking real estate and not, at war or something like that. So super grateful that we have these freedoms and opportunities. And anyway, so David Robinson, thanks so much for joining us, man. How are you doing today?
Doing great. My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Cool. And then hopefully you guys saw a little bit of the promo that I did. David is no novice to being on these calls and doing podcasts and stuff like that. So quick plug before I introduce him, and I'll mention it again at the end. Check in the chat. He has an awesome podcast that we're going to talk about a little bit. The link is there, The Apartment Journey. He's had, I think, over 75 guests or so on this. And so, man, I've noticed this with my calls. Like, you already know a little bit about the business, but once you start talking to other people that are in it, your knowledge just gets deepened and deepened. So we're going to look for some of your tips and tricks from some of your guests over your podcast. But I'd encourage all of you right now, take a minute, go subscribe to his podcast and start looking to some of his shows. They've been awesome. So let me introduce David really quick here. So David is the principal broker and managing partner of the Canova Group, a boutique multifamily investment group and sales team located in Utah. Since 2003, David has been involved in over 500 transactions and 175 million in real estate sales, acquisitions, and brokering. He is the host of one of the fastest growing apartment investing podcasts in the country, The Apartment Investing Journey. When he's not working on real estate transactions or hosting the podcast, you'll find David spending time with his wife of 16 years and their 4 kids. He loves coaching and watching his kids play sports, getting outdoors with friends, and sweating through a hard CrossFit workout. So we talked a little bit before I started the call. That's definitely one thing we share in common. And I know Alex is on the call and he's a big CrossFitter. So let's just talk a little bit about your life a little bit and add some detail to it. So when did you start doing CrossFit?
Man, about 6 years ago, I'd been going to the traditional gyms, and I had a friend that said, "Hey, you got to." Well, and even before he hit me up, I had watched these videos of these women climbing ropes, doing all kinds of crazy Olympic lifts, 8 packs. And I'm like, man, I'd love to try that, but I was totally intimidated by it. And so I never really did. There was multiple times where I was like, man, I'm going to go in today. And it just never really happened. And then my buddy hit me up one day and he said, hey, you got to come and check this out. I've been doing this CrossFit thing over at this little gym, and you should come and check it out. And so he convinced me. I went in and had one workout, and that was it. I was convinced. I loved it. Had that, the competition, the competitive environment, but also, just a cool little culture And so we kept working out and going to that gym for probably about a year. And then about a year into it, we decided, you know what, let's go off and do our own little thing here. And so me and a few of my friends opened up a CrossFit gym here in Pleasant Grove. So CrossFit XD in Pleasant Grove. And
I
we've
did
been
not
at it
know
for
that.
about 5 or 6 years now.
Oh, so you're the owner of the gym?
Me and a few partners, yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. That is fantastic. Well, I can relate. When I first started doing CrossFit, I'm like, okay, this is absolutely awful, but there's a weird awfulness that you love about it. So I'm like, I'm all in. So
That's so true. That's so true.
But I've noticed, and we'll maybe hit on this a little bit, just there's all these analogies, right? Like I think how you do one thing is how you do everything. And like how you do your exercise, your routine kind of is an indicator of like how you kind of roll in life. And so I've always talked with the guys at the gym, like, kind of like, okay, like based on how you work out and stuff like that, that's probably how you do a lot of the other stuff in your life, right? So that it's got to be hard because it makes it worth it. And then you enjoy it and you love it. So,
yeah,
all right,
I think there's definitely some parallels, that's for sure.
So did you grow up in Utah? Maybe just expand a little bit on your background.
Okay, yeah. Grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. Let's see. After high school, went to a little bit of college. Ended up serving a mission for my church, and came home and went back to college, and was working. My dad is a mechanical engineer, and has, as far as I can remember, his own small engineering firm. And so I was working for him. He tried to fire me a few times. I kept coming back while I was going to school, but I eventually dropped out of college. Wow. Went home, told my dad, my brother's a doctor. I've got two other brothers in the medical field. My dad's a mechanical engineer. And I walked into his office one day and said, hey, so I'm not going back to school. And he's, a little bit of a shock on his face, but he said, hey, so what's your plan? I told him my plan. He said, well, as long as you got a plan, I'll support you. So the plan was to get into real estate and carve out a path. I've always been sort of entrepreneurial minded and wanted to sort of do my own thing. And that's the direction we went. So ended up continued to work for him for a little bit while I was working on getting my license in Phoenix. Literally never, I got my license in Phoenix, never sold a property in Phoenix, and ended up on a whim moving up to Utah. I had an opportunity to come and work for, I had some family that was up here working for a broker up here, and really had nothing holding me down in Phoenix, and was looking for a new environment and new opportunity. And he said, come on up. We're looking to build this small little brokerage. Love to have you. So I came up. In a matter of, probably 2-3 weeks, I had gotten my license in Utah and immediately just began selling real estate.
And what year was that?
And this was back in 2003, 2004.
Okay. Yeah. So you've been doing this quite a while. Well, what led you originally to real estate? I always like knowing, because sometimes it's a book, or sometimes it's just a gut feel, or sometimes you just like back into it because you didn't know what you were doing and you were already in that environment to begin with.
Yeah, to be honest, I literally, no one that I had known prior had been in real estate. No family, really no friends. But while I was serving a mission, the mission president had encouraged me to get into real estate when I got home. Now, he didn't encourage me to drop out of college. He was a successful broker himself out of Houston, and just thought that it would be a good fit for my behavior and sort of how I functioned. And so the mission president, for all those that are familiar, is fairly influential in, a young man's life. And so I took that to heart, and it's been great. So that was really what started me down the path, was his suggestion. And I really didn't know what to expect. To be honest, I was just totally naive. I just knew that I didn't have a clear path from the traditional educational route that I was passionate about. And so, I decided to go that direction.
That's great. Okay, cool. So you're an agent, you're with this small brokerage. I mean, let's just jump right into it. And then we'll maybe deviate a little bit here because I want to maybe just to back up, I want to kind of get your take on a bunch of different things, but kind of the roadmap for those that are on this call that we're going to explore is, just how David got started, kind of how he progressed from being a new young agent, not knowing a lot about real estate to where he is at today. I want to talk a little bit about your podcast and what you've learned from your guests that have been on and how you've been able to implement maybe some ideas or relationships that have come about from that. Your group, I think you guys do a phenomenal job of branding and marketing. I know I've received your mailers at my house. So you are getting out there, and what successes you've had from that. If we have time for it, I want to talk about, your tips and tricks for financing some of these things as far as multifamily. And then, just overall your strategy, maybe some of your routines, your networking recommendations and stuff like that. So let's keep building off of your beginning. What kind of transactions or what did you focus on when you first started? And then let's build up to like how you came to have that mindset of specializing maybe in multifamily specifically.
Yeah. So moved up here to Utah, started working with that broker. I remember walking into his office, really not knowing what to expect, how I was going to make money, didn't even know how to do a transaction or, really anything about real estate, didn't even own my own home at that point in time and had never bought a property before. And he had suggested that I specialize in a particular area. And the idea of working with investors appealed to me. And so he had mentioned this this concept of short sale. And I had no idea what it was, but he told me, hey, it's this process of sort of, connecting with homeowners that are struggling to make payments. And this is 2003, 2004 as the market's ramping up, right? So there's not a lot of this going on.
Yep.
And he just sort of gave me enough to, pique my interest. And I said, great, I'll go and dominate that world. And so that's what I set out to do. Immediately started learning as much as I possibly could about the short sale process, the foreclosure process, what that entailed. And then started literally knocking doors on pre-foreclosure lists, notice of default lists. And that's what I did for, a handful of years as I was building things up. Meanwhile, really started to develop, but, a specialized knowledge around short sales, and decided that this was, I had some early success. I remember taking 7 listings in 1 month and thinking, okay, and I had these guys that have been in the business that were in this little office saying, what the heck is this kid doing? So, fast forward a little bit, I decided, hey, there's got to be a little bit better way to do this instead of just pounding the pavement the entire time. And so I started really digging into the marketing aspect of things, and in particular, websites and search engine optimization. And so this is probably 2006, 2005, 2006 in that area. And really just started digging into SEO and what the heck is this SEO thing and how do you get ranked on Google and all that. And so I built up a website that was specifically geared to short sale information and foreclosure information, the process, the ramifications, the potential solutions, et cetera, and really just provided a great value to those that were searching online. And hired a consultant. He helped a little bit with the optimization, but I did a lot of it myself. And all of a sudden, the market started to get to a place where it was a little bit of a tipping point, and my website started ranking for these long tail search phrases, foreclosure prevention in Utah, loan modification in Utah, short sale specialist in Utah, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden, I started getting these pings on my website, and these leads were coming through. People were requesting, had found my website through this SEO, and were requesting, basically I had a little button that said fast response form. People started clicking on that thing, and all of a sudden I had people reaching out to me. I didn't have to go knock on their doors anymore.
Awesome.
So that really just sort of springboarded me into the world of short sales. We built up a really fun and cool short sale business where I really emphasized helping homeowners and just trying to help them out of their difficult situations. And we, in the heyday, we were carrying anywhere between, 30 and 40 active listings at any given time, and cranking through a bunch of short sales.
The detail behind the scenes of navigating that with the loss mitigation departments. Back then it was like faxing crap in. I mean, that was super challenging, right? But that's a cool lesson. You were like, whether you knew it or not, you were way ahead of the game on like what was coming. And so you'd already set up like the marketing, the stuff to kind of feed that request for knowledge. You already had it there.
Yeah, I always like to say that I like to think that I was so smart that, I knew what was coming and I prepared for it, but it was really just happenstance. It was just really luck. And it was fun. So we ran that for quite a while. And here's the lesson I learned from that experience as we transitioned sort of out of the market. This is 2011. We ran that, had a great success, and for a young guy in his, late 20s, it was great. I was really short-sighted in that business though. And so as the market started to shift back the other way, I realized one day, all of a sudden I would look at my reports and my listing inventory was dropping, and the inbound leads from my website were dropping. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to go away, and I've got to figure things out. And that was a painful time. Yeah.
You'd ridden that for, I'm guessing what, five or six good solid years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, and all your eggs were in that basket, but clearly you had developed, relationships, systems, the ability to scale, have a little bit of a team, know how to facilitate a lot of volume. How many of those deals did you keep back then, if any, or were you just facilitating the transaction?
Yeah. So hindsight's always 20/20, right? Back then we did a handful of fix and flips.
Okay.
But I had an ethical dilemma in connecting with these homeowners and buying their properties. It really was a challenge for me. I had investors reach out to me all the time and say, hey, we want to buy these properties. And I had a dilemma that I struggled with, and ultimately leaned into just brokerage and service.
Yeah.
And so we didn't do much buy and hold, fix and flip. We really just focused on representing the client and providing brokerage services during that time. In hindsight, I'm not sure it was the right move, but it was the choice that I made back then.
Well, it's interesting. You were kind of like, in a way, whether you knew it or not, kind of like the original wholesaler back in the day, right? I mean, a different version of it. You had the distress sales because of the short sales, and your marketing method, clearly worked for you. And I think your next guest just joined the call, David. If you don't know Clay, you guys ought to connect offline. I bet he would be an awesome person on your podcast. So anyway, cool. Thanks everybody for joining. Okay, cool. So this is great because this is tracking like, kind of my journey a little bit. Back in, I started right about the same time as you, 2004, but I was on more of the opposite end. I was like trying to network with you and the Austin Haywoods, I'm trying to think of all the other guys that like dominated. Brian Pitcher dominated the short sale market, right? And to try and, for lack of a better word, manipulate those listings.
BPOs,
to get my offer in. And maybe you can comment on this. A lot of times people get so frustrated that they don't get their offer accepted first. But I learned from back in that day, doing those short sales, that it was often better to be the second or third person in line because that first offer would wear out, they'd lose their patience, and then you'd already beat up the bank, you already knew what the price was going to be, and then you come in and kind of close quick. As far as any strategies in negotiating, anything that comes to your mind right now that's maybe helpful in today's market or what may be coming, in the next few years, as far as negotiating deals and working with banks and people?
I'm not sure how things will play out moving forward. And the world of short sales, I'm sure, has changed dramatically. To be honest, I haven't been involved in a short sale in, I don't know, a few years at this point. So I'm sure that they learned a lot from the past, foreclosure crisis, and they'll be more systematized. But I would just say, it definitely did happen that way from time to time, where the first offer in, eventually backed out, and it was one of those, backup offers that we'd put in place. Ultimately, I used the first offer as just a way to get the process started. So I didn't care what it was. We just wanted an offer to get the process started. And so it really came down to what I was trying to do back then was focus almost exclusively on retail. So my goal was to minimize any potential repercussion to the seller. And I was going to sell that property for as much as I possibly could. Now, there were times where it was appropriate to bring in an investor when they got great discounts on the property, no question. Mm-hmm. But I had a lot of frustrated investors who, wanted my inventory, and to be honest, I just focused on trying to represent the seller the best I could.
Well, that's admirable, because I would bet you were the 10% of the agents out there that were doing that, right? So,
I could sleep well at night years after, when you had all these, claims of these attorneys that were coming down on these short sale agents and investors. So
yeah, absolutely. But what a valuable lesson. And so my takeaway so far is take the advice of people that are at where you're trying to get, like your mission president, the broker. Take the advice of specialize in something first, build upon that. Don't try and shotgun and get involved in a million different things at once, especially when you're starting new. And it doesn't matter what it ends up being. If you're into flipping, great. If you're into short sales, or if you're into wholesaling, but don't try and do wholesaling, commercial, flipping, multifamily, all at the same time. So after that, the market kind of started, going back up. What kind of caused you to shift your change in focus at some point to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're pretty much exclusively focused on multifamily one way or another, right?
Yeah, at this point, and we'll definitely get to that because that's really only been in the last a few years. So I'll try to bridge the gap here quickly.
Yeah,
the short sale world started to go away. I saw the writing on the wall. I saw my listing inventory dropping. I saw my leads dropping from my website. And I knew that I was going to have to make some changes. And I thought that I would be able to change on a dime. And I was mistaken. It was a painful time. I had to ultimately let my team go. I had, the short sales are very administrative heavy. So you have administrative staff, and, had to let everybody go. I literally went back to selling property by myself, and it was restarting. I had intended on sort of riding the short sale wave and then transitioning into residential. But it was a lot harder than I anticipated. Everything that I had built was so specific to short sales that it was a lot more challenging than I had anticipated, but ended up fighting through that. Ultimately, found myself in the traditional residential sales agent world, which, to be honest, I've never been passionate about or excited about, but I did what was necessary during that time. And, as people are coming out of everybody's waiting for this short sale thing to go away and for the market to recover.
Right.
I was the exact opposite.
Yeah. You're like, let's have a little bit more damage and collateral damage here. Come on. This economy's picking back up too quick.
Yeah. So that's what I did, and just pounded the pavement, got back after it, doing traditional residential stuff. And ultimately from there knew that, hey, being a sales agent on the residential side wasn't, for me. And so I thought, what's my best path here? And I just immediately began building a real estate team. And that's what I focused on for the next, 5 years or so. And, had varying levels of success. Building a residential sales team is very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And went through many different, evolutions of what that team looks like, from a lower split to, high value, high split. But ultimately, we had at its largest point, 12 agents on the team. A lot of those agents just not as productive as I would have liked. And it was a constant battle. It was a constant battle on a daily basis of trying to provide value to the agents, but also motivate agents to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And, we would do anywhere between 75 to 150 sales a year. And the team fluctuated from anywhere between 3 to 12 agents at its most. And then, I woke up one day and said, I can't do that. This isn't getting me to where I want to go, over the next, 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't owning real estate. I wasn't doing something that I was passionate about. And I'm not geared for this residential world, traditional residential sales world. I'm pretty analytical, pretty introverted. And I'm not this, social butterfly that likes to get out there and network. And so I just didn't fit into that traditional residential sales world. And I just wasn't passionate about it. And I think my agents eventually, would feel that. And so that's when I decided I had to make some decisions again. I built up, a fairly successful team, and ultimately said, hey, this isn't the path I'm going to go down for the remainder of my career. And I flipped my entire business on its head.
For the second time now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one kind of observation too is in any environment, even like right now, right, there's always opportunities. So when you were kind of feeling like, oh man, this short sale thing, this is drying up, all the rest of us were like, those were my heydays of flipping, right? Like we were doing 40, 50, 60 homes a year. And it was like the best time in the world for us. And now it's kind of come full circle again, where, some of the flippers are complaining about inventory and stuff that's available. So I guess this is awesome. You always got to be reevaluating where you're at, where you're trying to get, what you like, and then be willing to just cut bait, start over, and forge a new path, right? But you obviously kept in real estate, right? So the one specific thing is you didn't give up and go do pharmaceutical sales or something like that. You kept hammering away. Real estate continues to make sense for you at this point in time, right? And so
absolutely.
Yeah, pick it up from there. This is great.
Yeah. So, this was probably about 3 years ago. I met with my, I actually first hire when I brought on sales agents when I started building the team, who eventually became my business partner in that sales team. And I sat down with them and I said, hey, we can't do this long term. This isn't making sense. We're not scaling. We're not as profitable as we'd like to be, and it's not going to get us to where we want to go. And so we made that decision about 3 years ago, and then started putting pieces in place. I just started exploring what other avenues were out there for me. And I think I think my wife thought I was crazy. I think I was crazy at times, trying to figure out, here I am, 35 years old, had varying levels of success in real estate in the past. And now I was wanting to flip it on its head again. And for good or bad, that was the path I started to go down. And I just started to explore different, paths. What does commercial look like? What does development look like? Are there any other land? What's that all about? And I just started chatting with people and learning and exposing myself to as many other avenues within the real estate world as I could. And actually had a meeting with a good friend of mine, Steve Bond.
Oh yeah, sure.
Many of you probably are familiar with Steve. And I was sort of at a crossroads, and I hit him up and said, "Hey, Steve, can I take you to lunch?" And we went to lunch, and he said, "Hey," there was a lot more to this conversation, but ultimately he said, "Hey, you should really consider, getting heavy into multifamily." I'm like, man, didn't know much about it, didn't know what it entailed. But that was the catalyst for me to go down this path. And so I immediately started taking in as many podcasts, reading as many books, really doing the same thing that I did back in the short sale day, but now in multifamily. And that's when I started. There's a handful of reasons why I've done what I've done, but I just started setting a foundation while I was still running the residential team.
Yeah, because you still need to make money,
Yep.
right?
Yep. And then really my goal was, all right, I know that this is the path that I want to go down. How do I get my people into a place that so that they can make a healthy transition? I didn't want to leave people just high and dry. I didn't want to just bounce and say, "Hey, thanks guys. This was great." So I needed to spend enough time in helping guide them and coach and help them position themselves for other situations. And while I was also trying to set the foundation for where I wanted to go in the future.
Perfect. So let's talk a little bit. Maybe let's fast forward a little bit because there's still a ton to get here in the next half hour. So maybe let's start with where you're at now. Like talk a little bit about your Canova group. Let's start with that first. And then I want to maybe talk a little bit about your podcast and then kind of end with, well, let's actually start here. Why multifamily? I mean, this is an obvious question. I have a ton of guys on this call that I know love multifamily and apartments and stuff like that. And then others that I know are trying to break in and get more into it. So just fundamentally, why did you gravitate towards that? Why does that make sense? Why did it resonate when Steve Bond talked to you about multifamily and owning long-term, rental properties?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, I didn't know and I didn't understand. When he suggested this, it took a while for me to start to understand what the possibilities were inside of multifamily. But if you talk to anybody who's sort of been exposed to this idea of commercial multifamily, it really comes down to a handful of things, and one of those is scalability and the ability to do more deals, control more, and simplify your investments. Having the idea of having 100 doors under 100 units under one roof versus having 100 doors in multiple locations appealed to me. And I could see I didn't want to be a landlord. And so I thought, okay, how do I do this? How do I get involved in this space without having to be a landlord? And for me, I saw the potential of what could be done in the commercial multifamily space. And my eyes have been opened up to this whole world that, people are playing at a massive level, way bigger than I had ever even allowed myself to dream of in the past. So it really comes down to that scalability. If you've read any of the books, but cash flow, appreciation, principal pay down, and tax benefits. That's what multifamily is all about. But real estate in general, that's what it's all about. Multifamily just gives you the ability to scale and to control a lot more real estate with one transaction.
So how are you guys doing that now with your group? What is your focus? Maybe just tell us a little bit about how you guys are set up now. And I mentioned when I started, check out David's, obviously his podcast, but check out his website, check out his marketing stuff. You guys probably, if you own multifamily, you probably got a mailer from him at some point. I mean, I know I get them regularly. So what's kind of your focus? Is your focus to connecting a client with a property? Are you guys active in finding stuff for your own portfolios? What's kind of your wheelhouse these days?
Yeah. So Canova Group really focuses on brokerage as well as sales and investing. The podcast, The Apartment Investing Journey, is really started with me wanting to learn. And how can I connect with people that are doing things at a lot bigger level than me, that have years of experience? How can I add value to them? How can I support them in their business so that they would want to spend a few minutes with me and allowing me to just pick their brain?
Yeah, smart.
And so that was the foundation of it, right? I still didn't know anything about multifamily. But I had a few connections, Steve being one of them. He was one of my first interviews. He was incredibly supportive of me and actually encouraged me heavily to go down this path. Brock Zylstra, one of the top commercial multifamily brokers in the Western United States, with Marcus and Millichap. He was one of my early guests. And luckily I had some of those relationships and some guys that could help me, down this path, but I wanted to add value to them. I didn't want to just take, and I thought, oh, okay, the podcast gives me that opportunity to create an environment where they can get more exposure for their business and I can learn.
Yeah, perfect. So if you're okay with it, we're going to I love the participation, and Nate Worthen, he's on the call. I did the MRED with Nate. Nate's a super smart guy, and he always has awesome questions. So if you're okay with it, we'll kind of bounce around and get back on path here. But his questions, who are some of the current big players in the multifamily brokerage arena? And then how does your group maybe stack up with he gives specific names like Kip Paul, Mark Jensen, Danny Shin. Do you network with a lot of those guys? What does that world look like in the bigger multifamily brokerage?
Yeah. So that was a decision that I had to make early on, was like, all right, where am I going to find my place? And, Brock was kind enough to sit down, and I took him out to lunch, and I was able to pick his brain for a while, and he gave me some insight. But ultimately, I'm just looking at the link here that someone posted. I'll post a link to the podcast website, which is just apartmentinvestingjourney.com.
And I think I have it on there. They just are kind of grouped together between your website and
And then canovogroup.com is our most active website.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let me back up. Those guys, how do we stack up? Well, I didn't want to compete against those guys, nor could I. I came from the residential brokerage world. I even, chatted with you for a little bit about, hey, do I need to go commercial brokerage? Can I stay residential and still be in this space? And ultimately I settled in on, hey, I'm not going to compete with those guys. Brock's dealing with institutional investors, institutional size product, 200, 300 units, 100 plus generally here in Utah. And there's no way that I'm going to compete with them. So I decided to focus on small to mid-sized multifamily. And that's where I'm leaning in. And I just want to be able to understand that world at a very, very high level and provide an extraordinary amount of value to those owners in that area, as well as investors who are interested in that space. And so that's the answer to that question. I have no intention on competing with those guys.
But it sounds like you've been very surgical throughout your whole career, right? Short sales, then sales team. Now, your spot, where you're headed, and you're drilling down super deep. And for those that I'm sure everyone on the call knows what you're talking about, but you're talking like duplex to what? 20, 30 units?
Yeah. I'm leaning into the, 4 to 50 unit range. That's really the sweet spot that we would like to really just be a force in the coming years.
Awesome.
That's in the brokerage space, brokerage world and private investor world. I'm also very interested in getting into the larger syndications, but in other parts of the country. I've been involved in a couple larger projects in Phoenix as a market that I'm interested in, mainly because it's an area, it's where I'm from. And so I'm very familiar with that market. And I've built some relationships with some great operators in those markets. And so been involved in a deal in Mesa and also Phoenix that are 100 unit plus deals that they're operating. And I'm an investor in their deal.
Awesome.
So that's really what I want to focus on is, hey, I'm staying in this, world of 4 to 50 units, brokerage services, picking up deals that we can here locally, but investing in larger syndications in other quality markets in other parts of the country.
How would you say you've been able to wiggle your way in to this arena and going from maybe 3 years ago, maybe multifamily not totally being on your radar, to getting involved in, like you said, syndications, larger deals out of state, intense focus on the 4 to 50 unit here. How has that all happened? I guess what I'm really asking is how have you networked? How do you grow your network and your mentors and the people that you need to connect with? What's kind of your strategy? Obviously the podcast you mentioned is one, inviting other people on that know what they're talking about, and then, creating a relationship with them. But what are some other tips and tricks as far as, the way you network and build that team?
Man, you know what? I'm sure that there are so many people on this call today that would be able to give me advice on how to network, because that's not my wheelhouse. That's not what I'm good at. And that's why I had to lean into the podcast, to be honest. It forced me to reach out to people like you, Matt. I heard you speak at one of the RIAs that I had never been to. And this was, a couple of years ago. I heard you speak and I was like, man, this guy's sharp. Totally impressed. There's no way on earth I would have attempted to just reach out if I didn't have some way of adding value to your world, which was having you come on the podcast.
Absolutely.
So to be honest, I wish I could provide more, valuable information to the listeners about how to network. That's honestly the secret to my networking comes from the podcast.
That's awesome. So that's a perfect kind of lead in, because I really want people to go and listen to some of your episodes. I'm going to say his name wrong. Help me out. The most recent one I listened to, Rod
Khleif.
Yes. Yeah. That was really good. Now I know he has some educational things, which seems super solid, but I mean, you've had so many awesome guests on, and it seems like it kind of started with kind of local people that were in your immediate sphere, or like when you met me, it's like, hey, do you want to be on my podcast? So I think it's great. Like, what is comfortable for you, do it and start taking those steps. Then all of a sudden it becomes like second nature to you. I'm sure you were kind of terrified when you first started doing these podcasts, and now it's probably like, there's still probably a little bit of anxiousness when you have a different guest on that you don't know really well, but it's an awesome way to build your network. And then naturally what happens is, like, you had me on, now I'm like telling everybody I can to like get on your podcast, right? And then that grows your network, because the guests that you have on invite. What are maybe, and we're not gonna have time to totally, but maybe some highlights of your podcast calls, things you learned that you didn't think you were going to learn and that have been super applicable to your business?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, it's a ton of work. And it doesn't make any money. There's some things that I could do to make it at least break even, but it doesn't, I don't do it to monetize it at this point. Right. So I don't have any advertising on it. It's a lot of work, with very little tangible value, except for the relationships, which are invaluable.
Yep.
Right. So, I guess what I would say is this: it's actually very simple to set up and very inexpensive to set up. But it's time consuming, at least initially, unless you're planning on hiring out all the stuff. At this point, I've hired some VAs to help with graphics and audio. But to be honest, I was doing all the graphics. I was doing all the audio and everything. in the first, 6 months of setting up all the guests. We have a whole process that we follow when we book a guest at this point, which is, way more systematized than it was at the beginning. But it really just came down to us, systematizing what I was doing personally and getting that off my plate so that I could go focus on, having good relationships or good conversations with these people, adding value to their business, and then going and doing what makes me money, which is, brokering and investing in real estate.
Perfect. Any highlights, someone that you thought was like, holy cow, but that we all should follow or pay attention to, some additional information on multifamily?
Yeah, well, a couple little insights that I don't know how valuable they'll be, but Tim Watke, which a lot of you guys are familiar with. Tim was, hopefully Tim's okay with me saying this if this ever gets to him.
Well, and I had Tim on my call too. Tim, and I was with him this last week. Tim's fun. I want to be Tim. I want to be Tim.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah.
Like his story was, very inspiring, right? Where, he was a ski bum that, now turned, incredible real estate investor that has some incredible properties. But what was great about that is that Tim was worried about him coming on the podcast, right? He was like stressed out about it.
Yep.
I'm like, here this guy is that like, I want to be Tim one day, and he's worried about coming on the podcast. And so there's this level of like, wow, this guy should be way more confident about what he has to offer than he is. He just doesn't understand what he has. So It was cool for me to be able to help in some small way, sort of expose his story through the podcast. I really loved that. And then another time, having, oh man, his name just slipped my mind. This is, of course, what I do. Has 5,000 units.
I put you on the spot. It'll come to you.
Yeah, I'm going to actually look it up here in a minute. But I was just blown away at someone that could think so big. This guy was not detail oriented. It didn't even seem like a great businessman, but just thought at a massive level. And so that's really expanded my thinking, is like, all right, how do I think bigger? How do I take action that's a lot bigger than what I'm comfortable with today? Mm-hmm. I don't know if those are helpful, and the name will come to me as I look it up. But
no, they totally are, because sometimes you need to try and, model someone else that's doing it really well to kind of give you that oomph and that vision that you can get there too. Right. Yeah. I mean, just think back to when you first had the idea of the podcast. You would have never thought you would have had 74 people in. You've learned so much, you've added so much value to them, and it's just one step at a time, right?
Well,
one step at a time.
And I would say that the premise of the podcast is, again, it's all about the journey. Like my whole goal is to tell the story of the individual so that it can inspire all of us. Anyone who's listening to it, for me, it's motivational. It's inspiring. A lot of it doesn't come down to the tactics and the strategies. Right. It comes down to the mindset that we have around what we can accomplish as brokers or investors. And so that's probably the most powerful takeaway from, the 75 plus episodes that I've done, is that every single time I'm remotivated to take action that is uncomfortable for me.
And that's kind of why I've kept doing these calls, because I find that for me, I learn something new every time, whether it's an aha from talking to you or like a specific actionable item that I can take. And so again, that's everybody that's listening, figure out one thing you can take action on that this call might generate for you. And sometimes it's not even something related to real estate. Sometimes it's just clear your head, a different mindset, and ready to go. So Alex, I know you are knocking at the door. He's on the call right now, and he just typed in about, it's hard to network because maybe you're new and it's hard to go up to somebody and talk to them. And you just did it right there, Alex, by typing in the chat. Keep doing that. I know you're going to be at Slaria tonight, so make it a point to meet a couple of new people that you haven't met before, and just continue to break down those barriers. So any other advice for Alex as far as how to network when you're new and you're a little shy about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no easy way around it. I mean, if you're an introvert like me, man, I'd much rather sit behind a screen. In fact, I don't even like coming on the video. I prefer being behind the voice. And And man, Alex, it really just is about finding a way to add value to someone else, because that's when I feel comfortable approaching someone. Do I have something of value to give to them that would be worthwhile for them to spend a few minutes with me? And if you can figure out what you can do to add value to that other person, then all of a sudden that approach becomes comfortable. The reason why we're uncomfortable is because we're worried about taking, and we don't want to just take, we want to be able to give. And so try to find something that you could do that would add value to that person.
Awesome. All right. We're kind of getting down the tail end here. So I want to focus on, for the last 9 minutes, if any of you have questions, just dial it in, jump in. But what value can Keynova add to anyone here, especially investors? Do you guys have stuff that's kind of a private off market, or do you list all of your stuff, or do you guys have an internal networking group or something, or like what?
Yeah, great question. So we're sort of a hybrid between your traditional broker and a wholesaler. I don't wholesale, although I'm exploring that model more and more because there's some challenges in the way that we're currently functioning. But right now, Keynova Group brokers deals, and then we'll also, for the most part, we just broker deals, but about 50% of what we do is off market. So if you're an investor, you can go to KeynovaGroup.com and register for or join our investor network. That gives people access to our off market properties. Now we have our investor network, which is just a broad network that you probably, many of you are probably part of these other wholesaler lists. Man, a lot of guys that are doing a great job with what they're doing and turning out a ton of volume. What we do is a little bit different in that we have our investor network, but we have clients too. And so I want to connect with as many investors that are interested in small multifamily. Could be your very first purchase, could be up to 50 units. And I want to learn more about their goals and identify if we have the ability to help them source an off-market opportunity.
Perfect.
And then if we have, if there's an alignment, there's a process that we'll go through to identify if we're in alignment on what we can do for that investor and whether or not they're a qualified investor, then we'll go out specifically to target properties that match that investor's criteria. Outside of that, we identify deals and we try to put buyer and seller together. It's pretty simple.
I love it. And I initially misread Clay's type into the chat box. I thought he said, happy to help guide you on how to illegally wholesale in Utah. He meant legally, and that's what he put in there. So anyway, Clay obviously is a rock star, does a great job.
Absolutely.
And and he could be illegal as well. And he is cranking hard on his multifamily holdings and positions. I know that just from talking to him, as well as seeing his social media. So again, you ought to connect with everyone on this call, but you and Clay definitely ought to connect. I think you guys would add value to each other in a big way. So, all right. I always like asking this question. We didn't get to nearly as much as we.
Sorry, a lot of high level stuff. I probably could have gone into more detail.
No, I think it's perfect. It goes the way that it's supposed to go. And I think I didn't anticipate that this is where we were going to get, but I really liked seeing your strategy of you focus in on something, then you go very deep. How can you add value? You're very strategic about it. And that's going to pay off big time, because my bet is you have this network set up. You have these relationships. You have a system and a process. You're hunting deals. Obviously, we haven't talked about it, but not only have you sourced with other investors how to get on deals, but you've also built a network of banks, funds, resources. If and when at some point, it could be next year, it could be in 5 years, that things soften a little bit. Your background in short sales, your current setup, your ability to grow a team, you are going to absolutely crush it with your resources and network when there's, a little bit more inventory of multifamily to pick up. So I don't know why I haven't done it yet, but I'm immediately registering to be on your list because I'm looking for, just like a lot of people out here, I'm specifically looking for a few more deals, multifamily, that I can close on this year as well as into the future. So I think it's a beautiful thing. So my final, and Wanda, it's in the chat. I'll repost it, Canova Group, and I'll just refresh it in case it got missed here. But one question I always like to ask people when we're leaving is, if we were having this conversation 3 years from today, what would have needed to have happened in your life, professionally, but also personally, or to feel like you've had success? I guess what I'm asking is, where are you headed, right? Like, where are you headed, and what's your bigger picture from where you're at now, building upon what you've already done?
Man, great question. And it's a question I like to ask myself. I would say that for me to look back in 3 years and feel like we've, accomplished what we wanted to in the last 3 years, it would include continuing to build out our quality multifamily investor database. And there's a big difference between having, 4,000 investors on a list and having 100 high quality investors that are very interested in your lane. And that's what I would prefer. I don't mind the volume, and it's great because that allows me to connect with a lot of great people. But I really want to narrow in on having, 100 quality investors that I know I can turn to and put a deal together, regardless of the deal, whether it's a C-class massive value add or an A-class property that's totally performing. And so that's number one, is to continue to build out my investor database. Number two is, man, I'm jealous of Clay and what they have. And these guys that are doing massive volumes of finding opportunities and deals. And so I'm trying to fine tune that. And then lastly, it really comes down to this whole thing, Matt, comes down to me finding a place of financial independence. And I believe that will come through owning more commercial multifamily. And so if I could get to a place where I personally own 100 doors and are invested in 1,000 doors in other quality syndications in other parts of the country, that'd be great in 3 years.
I think that's a great goal. Well, you're a stud. I've appreciated, over the years since we got to know each other, a quick text or quick phone call about strategy. You always have a very specific purpose for why you're calling or whatever. And I think that's going to serve you super well. So everyone reach out and sign up or connect with David, sign up for his podcast, listen along, and you need to get more front stage, bro. You're good looking. You speak well. Let's get you out in front of the people, man, behind the mic.
Hey, I appreciate that. It's the introvert in me that holds me back. So I appreciate you forcing me to come on.
Right on. And
quick word. I'm going to send, so Canova Capital is sort of the syndication arm of what we do. I just posted canovagroup.com. That's where you would want to go and register if you want to be part of the investor network here in Utah.
Oh, great. Thanks for clarifying that. That's awesome. And then I hope tomorrow your workout totally sucks, man. So I'll be right there with you in a
every day. Every day. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks, David.
Bye-bye.